Welcome to the DAK Machine Safety Podcast. We support the development of a safer, sustainable workplace. In this podcast episode, we will discuss OSHA law and the relationship between OSHA and voluntary standards. There are over 200 U.S. organizations that develop voluntary standards, but we will focus mainly on B11 Standards, Inc. for general industry machine safety and the American Society of Safety Professionals, ASSP. These two organizations provide the approved American national standards, publications, articles, and methods needed to develop alternative methods.
What is OSHA law?
Congress passed the OSHA Act in 1970. OSHA is the standard of care for general industry and construction work sites. All employers have a statutory duty to follow OSHA's requirements and to exercise reasonable diligence to determine whether hazardous conditions exist in an area where their employees work. Section 5A1 of the OSHA Act is the General Duty Clause.
What is the General Duty Clause?
The General Duty Clause states, and I quote, "Each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees." It goes on to cite that employers shall comply with occupational safety and health standards promulgated under this act.
Do employees have any obligations?
Yes. Section 5B states, "Each employee shall comply with occupational safety and health standards and all rules, regulations, and orders issued pursuant to this act, which are applicable to his own actions and conduct."
Does OSHA regulate suppliers of machinery equipment and industrial processes?
Only from the standpoint of the employer and employee, work is being done to manufacture and assemble this equipment. OSHA does not cite a machine supplier when an injury occurs at another employer's workplace. Once purchased and put into production, it is the employer's responsibility to protect workers and be compliant with applicable OSHA regulations.
I work for a machine supplier. Why should I be interested in an employer issue?
Excellent question, and one that more suppliers should be asking. It's not uncommon for a supplier to be sued in civil court for alleged negligence in product design. Yet decades of research on serious and fatal injuries, published in credible sources like the American Society of Safety Professionals, peer-reviewed articles have shown that the vast majority of injuries are a result of an employer and/or employee committing an unsafe act by not following regulations, procedures, and recognized industry practices. Suppliers who ignore this fact ignore a relevant defense area in civil litigation.
Is OSHA different than EU regulations for the Machinery Directive?
Yes, there are substantive differences that would take an entire course to explain. For our purposes, American National Standards B11. 2023 Safety of Machinery is harmonized and aligned with ISO 12100. The good news is that if suppliers and users of machines conform to B11, they automatically conform to ISO 12100. The inverse is not true. B11 is much more current and inclusive than ISO 12100.
Are there any other significant differences between ISO and American National Standards?
Yes. Going back to the Treaty of Rome in the 1950s, EU and ISO regulations only applied to the machine supplier, the inverse of OSHA. In the US, both suppliers and users of machines, employers, come together to develop standards. Openness, balance, and due process are the foundations of voluntary standards. American national standards are updated or reaffirmed every 5 years, which means they are much more current than OSHA regulations.
Do I have to use voluntary standards?
No, as the name implies, the use of the standards is voluntary. You must comply with OSHA law, but you can choose to conform to American national standards. Such standards are particularly useful for the design and building of machines and equipment.
Does OSHA recognize voluntary standards?
Yes. OSHA has long recognized the value of voluntary standards and encouraged their use in industry. For example, OSHA has long referred suppliers and users to American National Standards, B1119, Performance Requirements for Risk Reduction Methods.
That's great. But if American national standards are voluntary, why should I spend my time on them?
Another good question. You don't have to, unless you wish to eliminate the problems associated with OSHA's regulations on lockout-tagout. In such cases, you must use American national standards to develop alternative methods to lockout-tagout.
A friend told me that locking an e-stop would suffice as an alternative method. Is that true?
Absolutely not. It is neither safe nor will it pass the OSHA compliance test. One of the steps in developing an alternative method is ensuring that the control system is reliable so that a single point failure will not result in unexpected, unintended motion.
Okay. I guess my current problems require a different approach. What are the steps involved in an alternative method?
Repeating what we said in the first podcast, select a task and identify the hazards associated with each task step. Then perform a task-based risk assessment. Then document the infeasibility of lockout-tagout and select an alternative method as your risk reduction method. Assess the residual risk of the alternative method and ensure that you have not introduced a new hazard. Lastly, you will validate the method and document your actions.
Gosh, that sounds like a lot of work.
It's not as bad as it sounds. At this stage, it's just new. We adhere to the principles of continuous improvement and lean thinking to make things easy to use and understandable.
What is lean thinking?
Lean was a term used to describe the Toyota production system in the 1990 book, The Machine That Changed the World. You can learn more about this topic in the next podcast. For now, it's only essential to understand that our methods are proven in the real world and based on simplicity and respect for the worker.
How does lean thinking affect the development of an alternative method?
One example is using a 4x4 risk matrix found in the American National Standards. There are other, far more complex risk matrices and methods, but we chose the simplest one out of respect for the worker.
Can you give me more explanation?
When you introduce something new like risk assessment, some workers and staff may be fearful of having to learn new terms and methods. The B11 4x4 risk matrix can be used on the factory floor with a clipboard and several experienced workers. They do not need a slide presentation, and the terms are easily understood.
Please continue.
Sure. Let's say the team has identified slip, trip, and fall hazards. When assessing the probability of occurrence, the team can choose from remote, unlikely, likely, or very likely. It's not uncommon to find a range of probabilities due to variables in the workplace, workers, etc. What's important at this stage is that adult participants need no detailed explanation of terminology. We'll cover this in more detail when we get to the podcast on task-based risk assessment.
Okay, I get that there's much to learn. Back to American national standards. Will using them help me deal with OSHA?
Yes, we're not lawyers and we're certainly not dispensing legal advice. The content of these tapes comes from personnel with over 100 years of experience in the occupational safety profession in standards development. We've lived the issues in the real world for employers and clients. The American National Standards, task-based risk assessment, and the issues of feasibility discussed in podcast number 1 are all recognized in writing by OSHA.
How do I know which voluntary standard to use?
Here's more good news. They are voluntary so you can use them or not, and you have the choice of what to use. American National Standards Z244.1 on lockout-tagout and B11 are closely related and aligned through years of each standard's update process. After selecting the alternative method as your means of risk reduction, go to B1119 and B1126 to design control circuits. If you have a large machine or a complex integrated manufacturing system, B1125 and B1120 will be of great value.
Are the American national standards in the real world?
Yes, it's one of the significant benefits of these standards. One great example is challenging the myth of zero risk. Quoting from the foreword to American National Standards, B11 safe is the state of being protected from recognized hazards that are likely to cause physical harm. There is no such thing as being absolutely safe, that is a complete absence of risk. In turn, there is no machine that is absolutely safe. All machinery contains hazards and some level of residual risk. However, the risk associated with those hazards should be reduced to an acceptable level.
Are you saying that following the methods of B11 and the instructions in this podcast can guide me to achieving acceptable risks and OSHA compliance?
Yes, we can't guarantee that the agency won't inspect and/or issue citations. What we do know is that proactive due diligence, following the best practices and methods of the B11 General Industry American National Standards, should give you the confidence to declare compliance based on complying with the strict language of OSHA regulation, OSHA's encouragement for employers to use voluntary standards, OSHA's specific references to use American National Standards, B11, following task-based risk assessment, which OSHA recognizes, American National Standards. B11 defines methodology in these podcasts. When feasibility was assessed and documented, experienced worker input on risk assessment and feasibility, capturing the variables of a task that could result in high-risk events, achieving acceptable risk using alternative methods. Thanks for tuning in to this episode by DAK Machine Safety. Today we discussed OSHA and voluntary standards. In the following podcast, we'll discuss the B11 General Industry Machine Safety Standards and their relationship to lean thinking and lean manufacturing. You can support us by clicking like and subscribing. Take care, everyone, and until next time.